If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine. And maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them. From disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hello, word nerds. Welcome to the ad for my podcast called The Dictionary. My name is Spencer Parks. I host this podcast. I read the dictionary, the words, the definitions, etymologies, even more. I talk about it. I try to explain things. I also sometimes try to put in some silly jokes or silly sing-songy things. You know, it's just a fun way to read the dictionary. Sometimes I have guests on, and I hope that you will turn on this podcast, check it out, start from the beginning, and, enjoy this, what I like to call edutainment. Check it out in all the places that you can find podcasts.
Hello and welcome to How Did This Not Get Made?
This is the podcast all about the movies you never saw, the scripts that were never filmed, and the ideas that never even made it to the page. My name is David Spencer.
And my name is Daniel Kaka. Welcome back to part 2 of The Curse of Spider-Man. If you haven't listened to part 1, be sure to listen to that episode before starting this one. And if you would like to learn about the publishing history of Spider-Man in the film that nearly happened in the 90s, be sure to listen to our episode titled James Cameron's Spider-Man. Now, on with the podcast.
Oh, my back!
On January 19th, Sony announced that the 500 Days of Summer director Mark Webb would be directing the Spider-Man reboot. Other directors considered were, again, David Fincher and Kathryn Bigelow.
Kathryn Bigelow, interesting.
Yeah.
I haven't actually seen Amazing Spider-Man. I just feel like I know of it through reputation. I've never taken the time to watch it because it seems like I would mostly find it kind of a bit of a mess. Like, I know it's got a lot of charming things in it, and I've heard that Peter Parker, Gwen Stacy scenes really work.
They have really great chemistry together.
Mark Webb, like, come on. Really? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Around May of 2010, casting had begun with the quote-unquote shortlist for Peter Parker. They considered Jamie Bell, who was in The Thing. There was Alden Ehrenreich, who was in Solo.
Wait, Alden Ehrenreich was considered for Peter Parker, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's interesting, because for some reason I thought that, like, Hail Caesar was one of his first movies. He was, like, tiny roles in a couple of movies before that.
Yeah.
Hail Caesar was, like, the first time that people, like, took notice of him.
Mm-hmm.
But he would have been a true unknown if they cast him as Peter Parker then.
Yeah. There was Frank Delane, who played Tom Riddle in Harry Potter.
Okay.
Obviously, Andrew Garfield.
Yep.
There was Josh Hutcherson, who was PETA in Hunger Games.
Yeah, I kind of like that idea. Josh Hutcherson is one of those actors who he deserves more than he gets. He's done a lot of stuff, but it's like...
He's in the new Five Nights at Freddy movie.
Oh, he is?
Yeah.
What? Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. There's Aaron Taylor Johnson.
Okay.
Around the time that he did Kick-Ass.
Yep.
He's also Quicksilver, and he's going to be Kraven the Hunter.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Anton Yelchin.
Anton Yelchin. Wow. I could definitely see that.
He played Yinsen in Star Trek. He was also in Odd Thomas. I don't know if you've ever seen Odd Thomas before.
No, I haven't.
It is a fantastic indie movie that he is the lead in, and just highly recommend. Logan Lerman. He was in Percy Jackson. He was also in Perks of Being a Wildflower.
Mm-hmm.
And Michael Angarano from Sky High.
Oh!
Yeah.
That would have been a little distracting, I feel like.
Yeah.
Sky High maybe it wasn't that big of a thing, but I know for us millennials, we all grew up on Sky High.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Now, all of these actors were considered, There was one exception, which was Joe Jonas, who actually auditioned for the role.
Oh.
Obviously didn't get it. Yeah.
Was Donald Glover considered at all?
This is actually my next sentence. Oddly enough, during this time, there was a Twitter campaign suggesting that Donald Glover should be cast as the next Peter Parker. Sony did not take that seriously.
That whole campaign just started because a scene in Community had him in Spider-Man pajamas.
And they're just like, he would be perfect.
He would be. He would have been.
So Sony did not take it seriously, but the suggestion was not unheard. And comic book writer Brian Michael Bendis, he used this as inspiration when he created his variation of Spider-Man, Miles Morales.
Yeah. The story that I heard is that they were already planning on Miles Morales as a character, but then because of this Twitter campaign, they directly based his likeness off of Donald Glover. And I think even started to make more plans for the character and maybe make him a bigger deal.
Yeah.
Because of, hey, there's enough people on the internet who could accept a black Peter Parker. We can do a black Spider-Man.
Just a little bit on Miles Morales. I know we're going to talk about him later, but I will say that with Donald Glover, later down the line, Donald Glover got to voice Miles Morales in the Disney XD show, The Ultimate Spider-Man, in which they do their own version of the multiverse.
My name is Miles Morales, and I'm Spider-Man.
Back to Sony. On July 1st, 2010, Andrew Garfield was confirmed. Mike was impressed by Garfield when he filmed a test scene where he eats a burger and tells Gwen Stacy that he had to fight the lizard.
I had to fight a lizard today, but it was not an ordinary lizard.
Side note, I was definitely one of those people at the time who hated the idea of Andrew Garfield playing Peter Parker and was one of those people who was like, Andrew Garfield's too cool to be Peter Parker. Peter Parker's a loser and a nerd. I don't want to see cool guy Andrew Garfield playing Peter. That kind of stink in my brain is probably the main reason why I never got around to actually watching it.
Watching No Way Home and you see his timidness, and then when you apply that to the 2 movies that he did, you can definitely see that he embodies a lot of Peter Parker.
I knew you'd come back.
Yeah, thanks for stepping up for me. You're the bravest kid I've ever seen. I'm gonna take care of this jerk. You go take care of your mom, okay? All right, get out of here. Go. Go.
Which I think is also funny because I feel like Andrew Garfield now is not the cool guy that Andrew Garfield of 2012 was. 2012 Andrew Garfield was I just did The Social Network. He seemed like so much more of a cool guy. And now he's the guy who did the biopic of the writer of Rent.
Yeah, Tick, Tick, Boom.
Now Andrew Garfield is musical theater nerd.
Yeah.
I feel like I accept Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker so much more now.
Oh, definitely. More and more news was coming out about the reboot. According to Entertainment Weekly, both MJ and Gwen Stacy were going to be competing love interests. I think that's just Entertainment Weekly not doing their research and going off of what happened in the 3rd movie.
Yeah.
Later, the Wrap confirmed that it would only be Gwen Stacy.
Which is a smart move.
Yeah. Around August of 2010, a list of actresses were considered, a few of which were Lily Collins. You might remember her from Emily in Paris. Ophelia Lovenbaum, who is in The Minx right now. There's Imogen Poots, who is in 28 Weeks Later. Teresa Palmer from Warm Bodies. Emma Roberts was considered for it. Mary Elizabeth Winstead, as we know as Ramona Flowers, she was considered. There's Emma Stone. There's Mia Wasikowski, who is from Alice in Wonderland. Diana Argon from Glee. Georgina Hagg, who played Elsa in Once Upon a Time, and Dominique McElligott, who played Queen Maeve in The Boys.
Oh, okay.
On October 5th, 2010, Emma Stone was confirmed as Gwen because of her on-screen chemistry that she had with Andrew Garfield, which then led to their off-screen chemistry, which led to them dating in real life. For the main big bad, Michael Fassbender was originally considered for the role of Dr. Kurt Connors before Rhys Ifans was cast for the role.
Question about Gwen Stacy. I haven't seen Amazing Spider-Man, so I don't know how the movie does it. But one of the things that I think is kind of interesting is that in the original 616 version of her, she's best friends with Mary Jane. I feel like they get introduced at around a similar time. Of the 2 of them, Mary Jane is kind of like the wild party animal. Gwen Stacy is a little bit more put together. Also, they don't meet until Peter Parker's in college. They're college classmates, not high school classmates. In the Ultimate Spider-Man, though, they flip that script where Mary Jane is the kind-hearted girl next door type, and Gwen Stacy is kind of like the bad girl rebel who, like, in her first introduction issue, gets detention because she brought a knife into school and, like, pulled a knife on someone.
Oh.
She's rebelling against her cop dad and all that. Do they... In Amazing Spider-Man, a big thing in the Spider-Man comics is the death of George Stacy, Gwen's father. Does he die in the Amazing Spider-Man movies?
Oh, I should know this.
I just looked it up. It looks like he does die.
Yeah, it's the lizard that kills him.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's canon. It's supposed to happen.
It's a canon event.
Otherwise, Spider-Man does not exist in this universe. So they're putting together the new Spider-Man movie. Now, to put together the script, Alvin Sargent, again, I feel like Alvin Sargent is the reason for all of our great Spider-Man memories. The same writer that was used for all of these Spider-Man Raimi films, he was asked to write the script, but he wasn't fully starting from scratch. He was working off of James Vanderbilt's draft and reworked that into an origin story. My speculation is that since Dr. Kirk Connors was introduced in the Spideyverse, Vanderbilt finally included the lizard in his draft, which is why it made it into the film as the main villain. Mm-hmm. After Sargent, Steve Kloves, who wrote Harry Potter, stepped in to polish the script. He initially turned down the job to write a Spider-Man draft, but he decided to take on the script as a favor to Alvin Sargent after being asked by his wife, producer Laura Ziskin. He wanted to give the film a more realistic tone, and he really liked Emma Stone and wanted to write dialogue for her. He also made sure that Spider-Man had mechanical web shooters and not organic ones.
I remember that being like one of the big things that people were talking about when that movie came out. It was just like, oh, but this one's going to be better than the Tobey Maguire movie because we got mechanical web shooters.
Yeah.
What's that for?
It's my web fluid. It's for my web shooters. Why?
Whoa! That came out of you. Yeah. You can't do that, huh?
No? How on earth does that even... Anyway, we're getting sidetracked. Look.
Kloves, he was offered to write the sequel, but he declined, saying that in the terms of the Spider-Man property, quote, I sort of dated it. I don't want to marry it. Interest at Sony to create a solo Venom film was still looming. Around March of 2012, Sony was negotiating with director Josh Trank, who recently left The Hunger Games, but he would go on to direct the Fantastic Four reboot in Capone. He and Robert Siegel, who wrote The Wrestler, were pitching their version of Venom, which can be described as an R-rated version of The Mask, which we know from the original version of The Mask, that's what The Mask was supposed to be.
Yeah.
Producer Matt Talmadge rejected their treatment. Around June of 2012, producers Avi Arad and Matthew Talmadge were promoting The Amazing Spider-Man, and in an exclusive interview with Hollywood.com, they revealed prematurely that they were working on a Venom film that would be interwoven in the new Spider-Man film coming next month. The Amazing Spider-Man released on July 3rd, 2012. The property still proved to be massively profitable for Sony, even though it didn't do as well as their first run. The film made about $760 million in the box office and around $65 million less than Spider-Man 2002. The reviews for The Amazing Spider-Man were all mixed, but to sum up the multiple reviews that I've read, the common conclusion was that it's a good Spider-Man movie, but not as good as the first. As agreed, James Vanderbilt penned the first draft of the sequel. Alex Kurtzman and Roberto Orci, who wrote Transformers and Star Trek, they were hired afterwards to rewrite the first draft, and they were simultaneously recruited to work on Venom. Jeff Pinkner, who wrote Fringe, was hired afterwards to write a draft on The Amazing Spider-Man 2. In the script, Mary Jane Watson was introduced as a possible love interest again. It even went as far as casting Shailene Woodley in the role.
Shailene Woodley, interesting.
And actually shot a couple scenes with her. Now, according to a Newsday interview, Andrew Garfield recalled, quote, I think all of those scenes were in our backyards. We had 2 or 3 scenes with me talking over the fence, and there was one of us riding together on a motorcycle that we never got to shoot. But yeah, she's an amazing actress and an amazing woman.
Yeah, I could definitely see her playing Mary Jane.
Yeah. And now Webb decided to cut the scenes and the character out of the movie to focus more solely on Gwen Stacy.
I know I said this earlier. When you're doing Gwen Stacy's death, I don't think you should have like, oh, but he's going to have somebody else.
Yeah, that should be like she comes up in, I guess, the moment of grief.
Yeah.
But they were definitely planning on putting Mary Jane into the 3rd film.
Yeah, which makes more sense to me.
Yeah. Meanwhile, producers Avi Arad and Matthew Tolmach were still obsessed with making a Venom movie. They were using the writers from The Amazing Spider-Man 2 to write the Venom movie, but they also hired Ed Solomon. Ed Solomon, he wrote Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. He wrote the Super Mario Brothers, Men in Black, and Now You See Me. Mm-hmm. And they had plans for Alex Kurtzman to direct this film. In April of 2014, Tolmach told Den of Geek the plans for the Spider-Man franchise. Between the release of The Amazing Spider-Man 3 and 4, Sony plans on releasing Venom and the Sinister Six spin-off films. They were very optimistic about the franchise until the theatrical release of Spider-Man 2. This is when the Sinister Six was supposed to come out.
Yeah.
You were saying about the Sinister Six.
Oh, when No Way Home came out, one thing that I heard on a podcast, this host was like, the one thing I would change about No Way Home, just put in one more villain. That ending sequence of No Way Home is the closest we've ever gotten to Sinister Six.
Yeah.
And if they just found an excuse to just put in one more villain, that way there were 6 different villains. Granted, this is a version where every villain is coming from different universes teaming up, but it would have been great.
Yeah.
Because I know they were doing like one villain from each previous Spider-Man movie. So there's like one from each of the Sam Raimi movies, one from each of the Andrew Garfield movies. If they just put in the Vulture, it would be so good.
Yeah. They were so close. But yeah, they were optimistic about Spider-Man 2. As far as the Venom film, there was a temporary title for it. It was going under the title Venom Carnage, which implied that Carnage was going to be the big bad that Venom would have to defeat in the film. Mm-hmm. The sequel hit theaters on May 2nd, 2014. During the first weekend, the film looked promising and made about $30 million more than the reboot. But all things went fuck up on the second weekend. The reviews were mixed, but mostly terrible, and the performance of the film during the second weekend dropped by 61%.
Yep.
Something that Sony hasn't seen since Spider-Man 3, which nearly the same percentage. Spider-Man 3 had a drop-off the next weekend of 61.5%. It also didn't help that Marvel, now owned by Disney, was having an upswing in their franchise, especially with Captain America, the Winter Soldier hitting theaters just a month before.
Yeah.
Fans were furious and calling for Sony to give up Spider-Man to Disney, believing that they would take better care of the character. And Sony was in hot water. On top of this, Sony was dealing with a major hack that revealed a lot about the company, their executives, and their potential films. Much of the executives were either let go of their position or just rearranged. This is a subject that we also covered in our 21 Jump Street Men in Black episode if you want to learn a little more about that. The hack did reveal some emails about potentially having Sam Raimi come back to direct a Spider-Man crossover, a multiverse movie temporarily titled Spider-Man versus the Amazing Spider-Man. The idea was to depart with the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man and potentially relaunch the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man with a film that takes place many years after Spider-Man 3. There was also a rumor reported by Latino Review that development for an Aunt May spin-off movie was in the works. The film would have revolved around Sally Field's character, but it would have been cast as a much younger version of her. The idea was that this was going to be an espionage story in the vein of AMC's Mad Men.
Oh, like the untold story of Batman's butler.
Yeah. I will say that this is around the time that Marvel was putting together the Agent Carter series.
Oh, interesting.
It was in development at the time that they were trying to think of this as well.
Now, in 616 timeline, as far as I know, Aunt May was never a super spy. Maybe she was, and I just haven't learned that yet. But Peter Parker's parents were spies.
Yes.
Oh, you know about this?
I do actually have it in my notes.
Oh.
So there's a few other things about like the Parker family past. In the comics Marvel released in around 2003, it was called Trouble. It was all about the characters May, Ben Parker, Rich Parker, and Mary. In this romantic drama, May cheats on Ben with Richard and gets pregnant with Peter. They later agree to keep Peter's biological mother a secret. Fans did not like this comic, though.
The mother a secret?
Yep, and I don't know if Sony would have even pulled anything from this comic. But yes, like you were saying, Peter Parker's parents were spies. And in fact, they were hired by S.H.I.E.L.D. to spy on Red Skull.
In one of the Spider-Man annuals from like the 70s, it's revealed that Red Skull killed Peter Parker's parents.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which is really bizarre in that comic. The annual is like Peter Parker trying to learn more about his parents and researching more about them and trying to find who killed them. And then Red Skull shows up and you're like, Red Skull has nothing to do with Spider-Man. It's such a like out of left field weird thing that doesn't quite work.
Yeah. Marvel has done some like wild things with, like I said, the Parker family. They just kind of seem to be throwing something at the wall with what they think is interesting, but is mostly just like inconsistent or just seems outright weird.
Yeah. I would not be surprised if I read a comic later on that retcons that Red Skull kills Peter Parker's parents thing.
Yeah. Sony was scrambling, and they pushed the release date of The Amazing Spider-Man 3 from 2016 to 2018. During the 2014 Comic-Con, Sony confirmed a Sinister Six movie written and directed by Drew Goddard. Drew Goddard, he directed Cloverfield and The Cabin in the Woods.
Mm-hmm. Drew Goddard's not a bad choice for that.
No. And that was going to be released in 2016. Producers Avi Arad and Matthew Tolmich explained that in the comics, the Sinister Six has always been a rotating cast of characters, but one of the possibilities that they revealed was this was going to include the Vulture, Mysterio, Electro, Kraven the Hunter, and Sandman.
Okay, that might have been the original Sinister Six lineup, because Sinister Six changes all the time, but I feel like that might have been the first version of them. Okay, now I gotta look this up.
But the producers also revealed that they hired Lisa Joy to make a female-led Spider-Man movie, or at least within the universe. Lisa Joy, who is from Westworld.
Mm-hmm.
They have no idea which characters they would cover first, but some of the possibilities were Silver Sable, Black Cat, Stunner, Firestar, and Spider-Woman.
Yeah.
Black Cat seemed to be the front runner since Felicia, who was portrayed by Felicia Jones, was introduced in The Amazing Spider-Man 2.
What's your name?
Felicia.
Felicia. From now on, everybody at this table works for Felicia.
It was later revealed that the female-led film was going to be centered around Black Cat and Silver Sable. It was initially written by Lisa Joy, and then rewrites were by Chris Yost, a prolific writer of a lot of comic books and superhero-based TV shows. He also wrote Thor, The Dark World, and Ragnarok. You looked up the original Sinister Six.
Yes. So the original Sinister Six was Doc Ock, Electro, Kraven, Mysterio, Sandman, and the Vulture.
Okay, so it's pretty close.
Yeah.
Because I noticed in that list that Doc Ock, which is a major villain, he was left off the list. But it seemed like they were just like, these are the ones that are just confirmed for now, but we can change it all later.
Yeah.
Over at Marvel Studios in Disney, they were making successful films with the characters that they had access to, which is basically all of Marvel's characters, excluding the X-Men, Fantastic Four, and Spider-Man, and all those characters that are wrapped in with those properties.
Mm-hmm.
Of all the characters that they could want in their universe, Spider-Man was at the top of their list, and Sony was not willing to let go of their most prized IP. Remember, their contract with Marvel allows them to keep the rights as long as they produce a new Spidey film every 5 years and 9 months.
Yep.
Marvel is willing to do anything to maybe get some control over Spider-Man. So, Kevin Feige, Marvel Studios president, has a meeting with Amy Pascal, Sony Pictures head. In Amy's office, while eating sandwiches that they just ordered, Kevin tells Amy, to paraphrase, Marvel is making good superhero movies, so maybe you should let us make the next Spider-Man movie for you.
We're actually doing good movies.
Yeah, yeah. Amy Pascal got so upset, she actually started to cry a bit and threw her sandwich at Kevin Feige.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Feige, he went back to Marvel Studios trying to figure out the next strategy of like what they could propose to Amy Pascal. And in February of 2015, Sony and Marvel came to an agreement. Marvel Studios makes the next set of Spider-Man films to fit in with the MCU. Marvel only takes 5%, just 5% of the profits, and Sony will get 95%, which is fantastic deal for Sony.
Yep.
They don't have to worry about making a movie. They get all the money. Marvel, they finally get Spider-Man.
For Marvel, I'm sure they're seeing this as like almost like a loss leader. Like the existence of Spider-Man in Infinity War and Endgame is going to be a big deal. So like we're willing to do this compromise.
Yeah. Also, at any point, either studio could terminate the deal with no repercussions.
Wow.
So, like, this thing is on thin ice. Now, this seems to be a bad deal for Marvel, like I said. But with this deal, Marvel is allowed to use Spider-Man as a guest star in any other MCU property, which seems like a great deal now.
Yeah.
Development had begun for a new Marvel Studios-led Spider-Man film in March of 2015. For Kevin Feige, his focus was on Peter Parker being in high school and made sure to leave out Spider-Man's origin story. Later down the line, the writers made a conscious decision not to include or name Uncle Ben. To write and direct the film was Drew Goddard.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Goddard was previously attached to make the Sinister Six film for Sony, but that didn't happen. When he was asked by Marvel to reboot the new Spider-Man, he had tried developing some ideas, but soon left the production. The next round of directors to choose from were Jonathan Levine, who made 50-50 and Warm Bodies. There was Ted Melfi, who directed St. Vincent and Hidden Figures. Jason Moore, who directed Pitch Perfect and Sisters. There was the duo John Francis Daly and Jonathan Goldstein. They wrote Game Night, Horrible Bosses, and the new Dungeons and Dragons movie.
Oh.
Yeah. Do you remember who John Francis Daly is?
No, I don't, but I've seen Game Night, and that was a fun movie.
Game Night, it's one of those movies that's better than it should be.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, he has a connection to Martin Starr.
That is false.
I tell you about using the bell for comedic purposes.
Because he was one of his friends in Freaks and Geeks.
Was he patting her on the back while he did it like guys do?
Bill, I don't know. It was a hug.
Show me. Do it to me.
I'm not gonna hug you.
Why? I'm quite secure with my manliness. It's okay to hug your friend, Sam. Okay, get off me. I get it.
Okay.
Yeah, John Francis Daly was the child actor in Freaks and Geeks, and he eventually went on to have a role in the show Bones.
Okay.
But yeah, he went on to write Dungeons and Dragons and Game Night and all that. Like, his career is like low-key amazing.
Yeah.
Another director they considered was John Watts. He directed Cop Car. And Jared Hess, who directed Napoleon Dynamite and Nacho Libre. As for the casting of Peter Parker, Marvel and Sony had in mind Nat Wolff, who is from The Fault in Our Stars and Death Note. There's Asa Butterfield, who was in Hugo, Ender's Game, and The Boy in the Striped Pajamas.
And is currently in Sex Education.
Mm-hmm. There was Tom Holland was a consideration. Before that, he was in a small movie called The Impossible with Naomi Watts.
Oh, yes, I remember that movie.
Timothy Chalamet was considered. Before that, he was actually in Interstellar.
Wait, Timothy Chalamet was in Interstellar? How did I forget about that?
What the heck did you do to my lander?
It wasn't me.
Let me guess. It was your ghost?
It knocked it off my shelf. Keeps on knocking the books off.
No such thing as a ghost, dumbass.
Hey.
Have you heard the story of Timothy Chalamet's advice from Leonardo DiCaprio?
Oh, where he said, no hard drugs, no superhero movies.
Yep.
Yeah. When they were on the set of, was it Don't Look Up?
Oh, yeah. So that definitely would have been afterwards.
Yes, way afterwards. And then Liam James, who was in The Way Back in 2012.
Oh, yeah.
Now, there were screen tests that were filmed for Butterfield, Holland, Judah Lewis, who was in The Babysitter, which is a great movie. There was Matt Lintz, who was actually in Miss Marvel. He plays the best friend in Miss Marvel.
Yeah.
Charlie Plummer, who was in King Jack. And then Charlie Rowe, who was in the Neverland miniseries.
This was to play Ned Leeds?
No, this was for Peter Parker.
Oh, okay. Still for Peter Parker. Sorry.
Yeah. So the field was narrowed down to Rowe and Holland. Many of the potential Peters did a chemistry test with Robert Downey Jr., but after doing a test with Chris Evans, Tom Holland was the actor who came out on top.
Huh.
Seriously, kid, where are you from?
Queens.
Maybe it's time you went back to Queens.
Little help? Thank you.
That's interesting. They did a screen test with Chris Evans. I mean, I guess it makes sense, but they've got like one line exchanged between them in all of the MCU.
You got hard, kid. Where you from?
Queens.
Brooklyn.
On June 23rd, 2015, Marvel and Sony officially announced that Tom Holland would star as the new web slinger, and the MCU Spidey film would be directed by John Watts. That month, John Francis Daley and Jonathan Goldstein were hired to write the script after being denied the directing role, but still wanted to be part of the film, so they pitched their ideas to Marvel. Watts began developing the story. When he was first hired, he was brought onto the set of Civil War so that he could collaborate with the Russo brothers to create a consistency in the character. Before getting hired, something Watts toyed with was having Nick Fury as Peter's mentor. Kevin Feige was the one to pitch Tony Stark being his mentor, which would make sense as to how Spider-Man gets his suit.
Mm-hmm.
Tom Holland stated in a Gizmodo interview, quote, "The original Spider-Man suit in this movie is made by Peter Parker. The original web shooters, goggles, that's all Peter Parker tech. It's just been upgraded by Tony Stark.
Yeah.
I often find in the previous movies, him making his Spider-Man suit was a little far-fetched. Our Spider-Man suit has the justification because it was made by Tony Stark."
But then it's got to use like nanobots and whatever, and I don't like that. But that's just a MCU thing in general that I don't like.
Yeah. Feige also wanted the tone to feel more like a John Hughes movie.
Mm-hmm.
Watts also was looking to make a coming-of-age story and took inspiration from Can't Buy Me Love, Say Anything, and Almost Famous. From the comics, Watts took elements from The Ultimate Spider-Man and Spider-Man Loves Mary Jane. For Daley and Goldstein, when they first started writing, they created a laundry list of items done by previous Spider-Man films and consciously avoided reusing them. Instead of the struggles that we see in the previous films, like with grief and financial issues, his friendship with Harry and his relationship with MJ, now Peter is focused on the struggles of high school, wanting to fight with the Avengers again, and seeking Tony Stark's approval. Something that was avoided was Spider-Man thwipping between skyscrapers. Instead, he was low to the ground, like he was in the suburbs. There was the Staten Island Ferry and Coney Island.
I didn't even think about that, but that makes sense.
Yeah. Since Peter is still discovering his newfound abilities, we see him making mistakes, even being afraid of heights, like when he climbs the Washington Monument and clings onto the airplane. The other element, which Marvel and DC is guilty of doing nowadays, is keeping the stakes low.
Yeah.
This does not need to be a world-ending event.
Low stakes.
Why does every superhero movie need to have a world-ending event? It doesn't have to do that.
And not just low stakes, but personal stakes. Personal stakes are what we need.
Yeah.
That's something that like Homecoming managed to really get right. All the stuff with Vulture absolutely works.
Yeah. Because, like, if it was a world-ending event, the Avengers would just step in and just be like, we got to fix this problem now.
But it's not just that. It makes it harder to feel invested in it because it's just like, if the stakes are so big, then you know the problem's going to be solved. But if the stakes are smaller and more personal, you're like, there's a chance that this movie's going to be written where they're actually going to lose this, you know?
Yeah. In April of 2016, Michael Keaton was slated to portray the villain Adrian Toomes, or the Vulture. But he had to drop out due to a scheduling conflict that he had when he was filming The Founder. John Leguizamo was actually asked to replace him.
Okay. I like this a lot, actually.
Yeah. Also, Mark Hamill asked if he could play the role once he found out that Michael Keaton was going to drop out.
That also would have been incredible. Holy moly. Between Mark Hamill, John Leguizamo, and Michael Keaton, those are three wildly different choices, and I would be so interested to see any version of this.
Right.
That's incredible. God, can you imagine Mark Hamill giving that speech to him in the warehouse? That would be so good.
The way that John Leguizamo like carries himself, I think it's just so brilliant. He would have been great. He would have been great as a Vulture. So fortunately for Michael Keaton, he was able to negotiate his shooting schedule, which actually kept him in both movies. So he's able to film both The Founder and Spider-Man Homecoming. Leguizamo was then offered a smaller role to make up for his time, but he turned it down altogether. He's like, I'm either the Vulture or I'm not.
Yeah. I wonder what they offered him, like maybe the Tinkerer or something.
Maybe. The Tinkerer would be really funny. There's one actor who kind of looks like Tom Hardy who like speaks up against Michael Keaton and then Michael Keaton accidentally fries him to death.
Oh, I don't remember that.
It's the guy who like shows up late.
Yeah, I remember who you're talking about, but I don't remember like who that actor was.
Yeah, I don't know who the actor was, but like I imagine John Leguizamo in that role specifically of just like him getting fed up and he's just like, you know what? I'm going to levitate you. And he's like vaporizes him. He's like, wait, where's the levitation gun? He's like, oh, that was over there.
Speaking of that warehouse scene, by the way, I know I was talking about ways that Homecoming harken back to like original Spider-Man comics, like Ditko era Spider-Man. The sequence in the warehouse when it crumbles on him and he lifts all the stuff off of him, that is also straight from a Spider-Man comic. So Amazing Spider-Man number 33, the cover for that is like recreated in the movie.
Oh yeah, I see it. Like the water's dripping down on him. He has the structure over him and just like, and pushes it off, which is kind of similar to Spider-Man 2.
Yeah.
When he's in the warehouse with Doc Ock.
Yeah, that's true.
As for the name Michelle Jones Watson, who is referred to as MJ, the name was actually made up for the film and was just more so as a nod to Mary Jane Watson.
Thank you. My friends call me MJ.
I thought you didn't have any friends.
I didn't.
And according to John Francis Daley, Michelle Jones was intended as a reinvention of Mary Jane.
Yeah.
Also, when it came to the Spider-Man suit, which was created by Tony Stark, producer Eric Carroll revealed in a IGN interview that all the various abilities that are built into the suit are actually abilities that were found in the comics.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I can understand your issue with him like getting this mech suit from Tony Stark, but like the fact that they all pay homage to like all the abilities of previous Spider-Mans, I kind of enjoy that.
Part of the problem for me there is that it becomes Tony Stark's doing instead of Peter Parker's doing. Mm-hmm. I feel like the movie is trying to do a thing by the end of it where he's going to be the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man and he's going to say, I'm going to do things my own way instead of doing it Tony Stark's way. But it like also doesn't fully commit to that. I wish it leaned into that a little bit more. The fact that that gets completely undone in the next time we see Peter Parker anyways, like it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
My like dream rewrite for Homecoming that I would love to see is he has that falling out with Tony Stark and then has an alternate mentor figure of the Prowler.
Oh.
Granted, I just would have loved to see them do more with that character in general. Having him stand in as like an alternate mentor figure of like Tony as being the rich guy mentor and then here's somebody who's like, okay, I'm going to like show you a different type of mentorship and a different type of problem solving and stuff. I think it could have been really cool.
That would have been really interesting. So Homecoming, it premiered July 7th, 2017, and it was a hit. On its opening weekend, it was the second highest earning Spider-Man film, with Spider-Man 3 being the first. After earning about $880 million in the box office, Homecoming became the highest grossing superhero film of the year, out-earning the much anticipated Wonder Woman movie.
Wow.
Meanwhile, over at Sony, something that was revealed in the Sony hack was an email exchange between Sony Pictures Entertainment co-chairman Amy Pascal and President Doug Belgrade, stating that Sony was planning to rejuvenate the Spider-Man franchise by developing an animated film with Phil Lord and Christopher Miller. Lord and Miller had proven themselves with Sony after writing and directing Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and the Lego Movie. Pascal was the one that first approached Lord and Miller to make an animated Spider-Man film, and they responded with wanting to adapt Dan Slott's 2014 Spider-Verse storyline, with Miles Morales being their main protagonist.
This is based off of Dan Slott's 2014 Spider-Verse event. The actual final movie has extremely little in common with Spider-Verse, like from a plot perspective, other than the fact that this is a multiverse story with multiple spider people. The original Spider-Verse saga, first of all, Peter Parker is the main character.
I mean, that's the case in the Ultimate Spider-Man animated series.
Oh, yes.
He visits different multiverses and discovers new abilities from them.
Yeah, in the original Spider-Verse, the villains are energy-eating vampires that are hunting spider people because spider people are the most delicious.
Oh boy.
And that's what the conflict is. It's very, very different than the personal story we get in Spider-Verse, and Kingpin and all of that. Into the Spider-Verse is all focused on Miles and just visiting Miles's world. The original Spider-Verse arc is nothing like that at all.
Yeah, it's just one of those where it's like, we're going to take the concept of the multiverse, different Spider-Man, and just kind of like, that's the baseline.
Yeah.
And we're just going to make our own thing.
Yeah. There's been a couple of different Spider-Verse arcs now. One of my favorites, I don't remember what it's called, but there was one where the villain is like a bunch of Electros, because it's basically like Electro realizing that he's always been kind of a D-tier villain, and he's like, I never get anything, but figures out how to like multiverse jump and basically teams up with all the other alternate universe Electros to basically be like, hey, we're always losing, but if we all team up, we can actually like do something good here.
Interesting.
That was a lot of fun, especially because, spoiler alert, it finally gets resolved by Spider-Punk defeating Elektra with the power of electric guitar and the power of rock. That made that arc one of my favorites.
Hey, everything is resolved with the power of rock. If you've seen The Boat That Rocks, the power of rock compels you.
That arc also has one of my favorite characters, which is a female Doc Ock, but from a universe where Doc Ock is a hero and Peter Parker is a villain.
Oh.
Step 3, I re-examine my personal biases.
I really like her character, and she's hanging out with all these spiders, and she's the only like not spider person there, but she is fitting in perfectly because in her universe, she's the one who's got the mentality like all these spider people, and it's Peter Parker who's a bad guy.
I like it.
Alternate universe stuff is so fun. Okay, this is really going off into a tangent. I love the different Spider Universe alternate versions of other characters. Probably one of my favorites is in the Gwen Stacy. Her superhero title has changed a couple of times in the comics, but now she's Ghost Spider. But in one of her comics, there is Matt Murdock Kingpin, and he looks so awesome. So Matt Murdock Kingpin as a villain is so cool.
Wow.
Just like his design.
I like the color palette that they're doing with him. He's like this red and orange.
Yeah, with the suit and then the red sunglasses, and then he's got the Kingpin cane, but it's also his like walking stick. He looks so cool.
Of course he would be a good Kingpin.
How did you just do that? I'm a really good lawyer.
During the 2015 CinemaCon, Sony Pictures chairman Tom Rothman stated that Spider-Man would coexist with the live-action Spider-Man films. Sony then had to retract all of his statements during the press conference to clarify this film exists independently of the projects of the live-action Spider-Man universe, all of which are continuing.
Yeah.
June 2016, Phil Lord completed the script, and to direct, Sony hired Bob Persichetti. Now, this was his directing debut, but prior to that, he was the head of story for The Little Prince and Puss in Boots. He started his career as an in-betweener for Disney. He was working on films such as Hercules, Mulan, Tarzan, Fantasia 2000, The Emperor's New Groove, Atlantis, and Treasure Planet. It looks like he jumped ship with Disney and went to work for their rival DreamWorks to work as a storyboard artist for Shrek 2 and Monsters vs. Aliens, and then he got promoted for Puss in Boots. In an IGN article, Phil Lord stated that this film, quote, "It is not going to feel like any other Spider-Man movie you've seen. It will stand on its own as a unique film-going experience.
And it does.
It does, yes. In January 2017, Sony added to the roster of directors Peter Ramsey, a storyboard artist turned director who previously directed Rise of the Guardians. By December 2017, Rodney Rothman was added as another co-director, prior to which he helped co-write 22 Jump Street with Lord and Miller. So it's really interesting when they're choosing their directors. They're not thinking about like directors. They're thinking about like who is good at animation.
Yeah.
Who works well in animation, and we're going to choose those guys. With Rodney Rothman, I feel like they brought him in because they're like, okay, these guys are focused on the animation, but we need someone who really focuses on the story of it. And I think that's why they brought him in there. Now, to consult on the film was Miles Morales' co-creator, Brian Michael Bendis. Seeing that what made this film unique was that this was a story about Miles, more so than it was about Spider-Man.
Yeah.
In the first animatic, the film was estimated to be over 2 hours long, which is not too far from the actual film, which was actually just under 2 hours by like 3 minutes. They also ran into a big problem when the directors concluded that the film's plot was just too similar to the live-action films.
I'm pretty sure you know the rest.
With great power comes great responsibility.
I saved a bunch of people, fell in love, saved the city, and then I saved the city again, and again, and again, and again. And I did this. We don't really talk about this.
So around a year before the film was being released, Lord and Rothman had to do a major rewrite. And in 2020, Phil Lord revealed on Twitter the plot point layout that they wrote on a whiteboard stating, "So here is the story wheel for Spider-Verse. We did a big shakeup of the story less than a year from release, and we had to figure out how to reshape sequences we had already boarded and animated and fold them into new stuff. Oh, and we rewrote the whole third act."
Wow.
So this was also the first film that Lord and Miller weren't credited as co-creators. So this wasn't like Lord and Miller working together. This was more so Lord and Rothman working together to create the story. In the original version, it featured a love story between Miles Morales and Spider-Gwen. This was scrapped, and her presence in the film would have been severely cut if it wasn't for producer Christina Steinberg, who fought to keep her in the film.
Can't believe they thought about cutting her just because they didn't want to do a love story.
Yeah, it's like she contributes so much, but because she doesn't fall in love with Miles Morales at the end, like that's her only purpose is girl.
Yeah.
It's like, no. There was also a discussion about what the end credits scene should be. One scrapped idea was to have a cameo of all three live-action Spider-Men, Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and Tom Holland, to arrive at the end. Sony canceled the idea, thinking that it was too risky and that it would cause confusion. Tom Holland, which is the spoiler alert in human form, he stated in a video for joe.co.uk.
At one point, I was supposed to be in it. Yeah, there was going to be another Peter Parker. Like there was like a scene in a train station or something, and like it was going to be like an Easter egg. I was going to walk through the background and say like, "Hey kid" or something, and never happened. I'm heartbroken.
And speaking of confusion, Peter B. Parker was initially going to be voiced by Tobey Maguire, but Sony again stepped in and said that it would be too confusing, and Jake Johnson was cast in the role instead.
Yeah, I love Jake Johnson's Peter Parker.
He's so good.
He's incredible. But on the flip side, I totally see how that was like written with Tobey Maguire in mind, because his character really does feel like it is a continuation of the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man stuff. Like even just like on a chronological level, this is supposed to be like after he's been Spider-Manning for like 15 or 20 years. So it's like the timeline lines up and like his flashback stuff totally lines up.
For a moment there, when I first watched the movie, I thought it was Tobey Maguire, and like because the storyline lined up so well with like what happened in the 2002 Spider-Man, I was like, that's definitely Tobey Maguire. And then I had to look up the casting later to find that it was Jake Johnson instead. And I was like, I thought maybe he was just putting on a weird voice. And I was like, oh, okay, this checks out now.
Yeah.
Although the film is confusing with the multiple Spider-Man versions, Lord did state in a Fandango interview that all the Spider-Man characters were pulled from Spider-Man comics, that they would have found in their research.
It's very smart that they have other names other than Spider-Man. If they brought in other versions of Spider-Man that went by Spider-Man in their universe, it would have been way more confusing. But the fact that it's Spider-Man Noir and Spider-Ham and Penny Parker and Spider-Gwen, or Spider-Woman as she would have been called at the time, like that makes it a little bit easier to work with.
Yeah, that does make it easier, but it's still great that in the second Across the Spider-Verse where he says, like, get Spider-Man, and everyone just looks at each other and they're just like, wait, which one? So the look of the film was developed by Alberto Malgo, the award-winning animator behind Love, Death, and Robots. He also worked on Corpse Bride, The Beatles Rock Band, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, and Tron Uprising by Disney.
I love it that you threw in Beatles Rock Band there because, you know, I'm a big Rock Band fan.
Oh, yeah, I did.
Also, the visuals of that game are something that, like, a lot of people talk about. It's like, you know, they did a really good job with the visuals of that. So I love that he also did Spider-Verse.
Next time you play it with anyone, just be like, hey, do you know the guy who animated this also?
Yeah, right.
Spider-Man. The idea of the film that it needed to look like you stepped inside of a comic book. The animation style was daunting for the animators, and it was estimated that one animator's work in a year contributed to maybe 10 seconds on screen.
Wow.
The film's release date was constantly being kicked further and further away as the crew in the film grew from 60 animators to 142 animators by August of 2018, and it peaked at around 177 animators at one point to complete the film. And this was the largest animation crew Sony Pictures has ever used for a film.
Wow.
One other movie beat that record. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse premiered December 14th, 2018. To keep in mind of what was in the zeitgeist, Spider-Man Homecoming was released the year before, Infinity War was released in June of 2018, and Venom was released back in October. So in the box office, it grossed nearly $385 million, making this at the time Sony's highest earning animated film, surpassing Hotel Transylvania 2. Critically, it was a hit. Currently, its Rotten Tomatoes score is 97%, the highest score any Spider-Man movie has ever received.
Well deserved.
The second highest is Across the Spider-Verse with 95%. The highest live action is actually both Spider-Man 2 and No Way Home. Both of them scored at 93%. It won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature, breaking Disney's 6-year streak. I won't go through every award, but it did win Best Animated Feature from the African American Film Critics Association, the Alliance of Women Film Journalism, American Cinema Editors, the Annie Awards, the BET Awards, the British Academy Film Awards, Critics' Choice Movie Awards, the Golden Globes Awards, Golden Reel Awards, Producers Guild of America Awards, Saturn Awards, and the Razzie Redeemer Award.
What is that?
I think this is to make up for Spider-Man 3.
Oh, interesting.
Or the Amazing Spider-Man series. This goes to say that this is probably the greatest Spider-Man movie of all time.
I think it is the greatest superhero movie of all time. I love Spider-Verse. My love for that movie is undying. The reason for me why it's the greatest superhero movie is that it does such a good job at so many different superhero movie storytelling tropes.
Yeah.
It does such a good job at the regular person becoming a superhero. It does such a good job at the team up of different individuals having to figure out how to work together. The villain is amazing. He is equally terrifying, but also has like a really personal stake to what he's doing. Like his ultimate plan is potentially world ending, but his motivations aren't to end the world.
No.
His motivations are extremely personal.
Is to get his family back.
The action is incredible. Like there's not a dull moment in the movie. There's not a dull frame in that movie. It does everything that I would wish a superhero movie would do, with maybe the exception of scenes where normal people are being heroes. It's okay. It's still great. It's still incredible.
Yeah. So we're going to go back to Venom. and just kind of what happened there. So by March of 2016, a new draft had been written by Dante Harper. He is the guy who did Alien Covenant.
Mm-hmm.
This film was going to be a standalone, separate from the MCU and the Spider-Verse, and in a way launched its own franchise referred to as, quote, Sony's Spider-Man universe.
Yes.
At this point, Kurtzman was no longer involved in the production. For Harper, he envisioned this Venom film to be an R-rated sci-fi horror film. After seeing the success of the R-rated superhero films such as Deadpool and Logan, he figured this would work. Quote, fans might not appreciate Sony going with the story from the 2003 18-issue Venom series. That's because that's one of those terribly comic booky stories where eventually revealed that it wasn't the real Venom all along. It was an imposter. Still, it's got what it takes to be a fun sci-fi horror superhero flick, especially with the number of homages to classic movies it contains. That's obvious from the start, which kicks off with a Arctic outpost that gets overrun by a symbiote. It's blatantly borrowing from John Carpenter's 1982 masterpiece, The Thing. But there are certainly far worse movies from which to derive inspiration. It even takes over a dog at some point, just like The Thing. The symbiote goes from one host to the next and making the remaining survivors paranoid as it takes them all over. It eventually makes it to civilization after a stop in Canada to mess with Wolverine, finding Eddie Brock in New York City and forcing a two-way Venom fight. If they needed a standalone story, this could be it. While a couple of familiar superheroes show up, they really don't need any additional characters to tell the story. Plus, it could serve as an origin story if they choose. Sony didn't like the direction that Harper was going in, so they had the script rewritten by Scott Rosenberg, who wrote Con Air, High Fidelity, and Jumanji. And they also had Jeff Pinkner come in, who wrote The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Later down the line, Kelly Marcel, who wrote Saving Mr. Banks, 50 Shades of Grey, and Cruella, she would write the final draft. It seems like Sony was still working towards making an R-rated film since they were considering Addie Shanker, who produced Dread, The Gray. There was this Power Rangers short. I don't know if you remember that. There was this gritty Power Rangers short that was made back in the late aughts.
Yeah.
But he produced that. He also made a pitch for an R-rated Where's Waldo movie in which to answer the question, why is Waldo hiding?
Okay.
And then they wanted Adam Wingard to direct. Adam Wingard did Godzilla vs. Kong, The Guest, You're Next, and VHS. So a lot of horror films in there. Another director considered was David F. Sandberg, who did Lights Out. I don't know if you saw Lights Out. That's a terrifying film, which was based on a short film in which a woman, she's about to go to bed, turns off the light, and when she turns off the light, a mysterious creature appears, and then when she turns it on, it disappears. And every time she turns off the light, it just reappears, disappears, reappears, disappears. It's such a fascinating concept, and it's just terrifying. He was in negotiations with Sony until WB hired him to direct Shazam. But anyway, they were continuing on with Venom, and the film was going to be based on the 1993 6-issue run of Venom, Lethal Predator, and the 1995 5-issue run, Planet of the Symbiotes story arc. The writers did run into the issue of not having Spider-Man, since the character, and more specifically his suit, was a big part of Venom's origin story. The writers looked at the Ultimate Marvel version of Venom, where the origins was simply a symbiote bonding with a human host.
Yeah, not even an alien in Ultimate Spider-Man.
Is it a science experiment?
Yeah, I actually just read the arc that introduces Ultimate Venom. Basically, it's that Peter Parker's parents were biochemists or something like that, or specifically his dad was, and was working with Eddie Brock's dad. They were like, oh, we're going to create this compound that would be able to bond with you and fix cancers and stuff like that. And then that compound became the Venom symbiote.
I like that origin story. That's cool.
Yeah. It's kind of cool.
Also, there was a line in Venom where he says,
eyes, lungs, pancreas, So many snacks, so little time.
That was actually quoted from The Amazing Spider-Man number 374. It came out in February of 1993.
All right.
So the executives at Sony decided against Venom being an R-rated movie, and the violence was toned down. The thought was to match the family-friendly tone Marvel was putting out with their Spider-Man films. In May of 2017, Sony announced the director of Venom, Ruben Fleischer, who directed Zombieland, 30 Minutes or Less, and Gangster Squad. And to star as Eddie Brock was Tom Hardy. Now, Tom Hardy's son was actually a big fan of the character, and when Tom heard that this film was being made, he actually dropped out of the film that he was working on at the time, which was Triple Frontier, to join the Venom production. I couldn't find out who else was going to be cast as Eddie, but for the film's antagonist, which was Carl Drake, who was, well, Carl Drake / Riot, which, by the way, that combination was made up for the film. That's not from the comics at all. Before Riz Ahmed, other actors that were considered were Matt Smith, Doctor who ended up being the antagonist in Morbius.
Yep.
There was also Pedro Pascal,
Ooh,
was being considered too. And then he got casted for Maxwell Lord in Wonder Woman.
Yep.
And then there was Matthew Schoenaerts, who was in a show called Rust and Bone. Amy Pascal would explain that this Venom would be in the same universe as the current MCU Spider-Man, although Kevin Feige denied any connections and said that Venom was solely a Sony project. So we have a lot of executives over at Sony just be like, this is part of the MCU. And MCU's like, no, don't do that.
Yeah.
Marvel continued using Tom Holland in their films, most notably Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, and had Spidey return for a sequel, Spider-Man Far From Home. At Sony, they were continuing to build the Spider-Man universe, sans Spider-Man, with the sequel Venom, Let There Be Carnage. Woody Harrelson was cast as Carnage as a request from Fleischer because they worked with him on Zombieland. He thought he would be great for the role, but unfortunately Fleischer could not return to direct the sequel due to his commitments with Zombieland Double Tap. To direct, Sony had a short list of Andy Serkis, who recently directed Breathe. There was Travis Knight, who did Kubo and the Two Strings and Bumblebee, and Rupert Wyatt, who did The Escapists and Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Andy Serkis would eventually take the gig to direct the second Venom movie. In another Spider-Verse, Phil Lord and Chris Miller continued to work on their Spider-Man sequel, Across the Spider-Verse. Planning for the Spider-Verse sequel began well before the release of the first film, which is on par for Sony at this point. Producer Amy Pascal revealed early on that this film would focus on the love story between Miles Morales and Gwen, since it was cut out of the first film. And this would be the launching pad for the solo Spider-Woman movie. To direct Across the Spider-Verse was Joaquim Dos Santos, who is a storyboard artist and director for Superman Doomsday, for the Justice League, The New Frontier. He was a storyboard artist and director for Avatar and The Legend of Korra. He also worked on Voltron, Invincible, Teen Titans. Like, he knows what he's doing as far as animation goes.
Yeah.
And then there was David Callahan. He wrote for Jean-Claude Van Johnson, Godzilla, Ant-Man, Wonder Woman 1984, Zombieland Double Tap, and Shang-Chi. Phil Lord and Callahan collaborated on the script, and around April of 2021, roles shifted. Callahan stepped back from directing, and Kemp Powers, who directed Soul, and Justin K. Thompson, who is the production designer on Into the Spider-Verse and Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, they stepped in to co-direct with DeSantos. In December of 2021, Lord and Miller stated that the sequel would have to be split into two parts in order for them to tell the story that they wanted to, and that the two films would be worked on simultaneously. Sony announced that the release date for Beyond the Spider-Verse will be March 29th, 2024, but with the current ongoing strikes, production has been delayed and the actual release date is unknown.
Yeah.
So for the look of the film, the team took on an ambitious task of creating 6 different worlds, which meant 6 different styles, tones, and animation styles. With that, the workload increased significantly, forcing the production to hire nearly 1,000 crew members. Now, this is the largest crew that has ever worked on an animated feature. One of those animators was a 14-year-old Preston Mutanga, whose fan creation of the Into the Spider-Verse teaser trailer using Legos caught the attention and impressed Lord and Miller so much that they wanted to include a scene where they enter into the Lego Spider-Verse. To expand the Spider-Verse, the film would add 240 more characters from the first film, many of them being different variations of Spider-Man, all designed by comic book artist Chris Anka.
Also, I'm pretty sure all previously coming from Spider-Verse comics.
Oh, yes.
Every single Spider-Man you see there is from a comic.
Yes.
Well, I guess not every single one, because they did some here's a celebrity spider-sona or whatever, but there's some musician who has a spider version of himself in there.
Oh.
I don't remember. There's a couple of those in there.
Interesting. With the addition of all the different variations of Spider-Man, all of which we don't have time to name, there are two that Phil Lord really wanted but still haven't used. There's the Japanese Spider-Man and Italian Spider-Man. But there's still hope in the third film.
The one that I most want to see, which I don't believe is in Across the Spider-Verse, is Spiders-Man.
Oh.
Do you know Spiders-Man?
No, I don't.
Spiders-Man is a mass of millions of spiders who share a hive mind and live inside of the Spider-Man suit and are convinced that they are actually Peter Parker.
That's incredible.
But it's just a million spiders.
A million spiders in a trench coat.
Yep.
Great.
Yep. It's amazing.
Now, there is a rumor that Tom Holland may show up in a Spider-Verse film, although that's not confirmed. But Holland did say that Amy Pascal has approached him about possibly appearing. The inclusion of Jonathan Owen, or The Spot, was a suggestion from Avi Arad.
My spider made you Spider-Man.
What?
You ran through the cafeteria. You hit me with a bagel.
Ironically enough, the same producer that was pushing for Venom in the third Sam Raimi Spider-Man. And it turns out he had a point. An unknown, deep-cut, throwaway villain whose abilities relate to the much larger problem at hand. Plus, his appearance really works well for the animation.
Yeah.
Avi Arad is now understanding the value in lesser-known villains and using their abilities to contribute to the story. Finally comes full circle. He finally understands how to make a Spider-Man movie work.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say finally. I feel like it sounds more like he's had a lot of good ideas and had one major bad idea.
Yeah.
He has had a lot of great ideas for the Spider-Man movies. But absolutely putting Spot in Across the Spider-Verse is fantastic.
Brilliant, yeah. Director Kent Powers, in a May 2023 interview with Slash Film, stated that the film was not tied to the MCU, although there is a throwaway line written by Lord and Miller.
Don't even get me started on Doctor Strange and the little nerd back on Earth 1999-99.
1999-99.
Yep.
That's right. It's Earth 1999-99, not Earth 616, Doctor Strange sequel. Pissed me off so much sitting in the theater when what's her name says you come from Earth 616. And I'm like, no, he doesn't, because Earth 616 is the comics, and these aren't comics. These are movies.
Yes.
This is a different Earth.
Yes.
Call it something different. And especially that comics have established that the MCU world is 1999-99.
Yes.
So I was very happy that Across the Spider-Verse,
they got it right.
Got it right.
There was also Donald Glover's cameo as the Prowler. And when Lord and Miller were asked if that's the Prowler from the MCU, Miller responded with a very vague, "That's for you to decide. You know, all things are possible in the multiverse."
I think it was winter 2015. I worked on a short film that was starring and produced by Tony Revolori, who plays Flash Thompson in the MCU Spider-Man movies.
Okay.
I was talking about Marvel stuff, and I knew that he was going to be in Spider-Man Homecoming, but it was one of those things where I was like, obviously he can't give a lot of information. And then on the last day, he was like, all right, you get one Spider-Man question. And my one Spider-Man question was, who's Donald Glover playing? Because I knew Donald Glover was in the movie, but they hadn't announced who he was playing yet. And then he told me it was Aaron Davis, and it was like, yes, that's perfect.
Oh, wow.
I knew enough about like the Miles Morales storyline and Aaron Davis and the Prowler and everything.
So good.
I don't want those weapons in this neighborhood. I got a nephew who live here.
Which, side note, In the comics, I didn't realize this. Prowler is first introduced in like Silver Age Spider-Man comics, and he is Hobie Brown, which Hobie Brown is the name that is Spider-Punk. So it's just kind of an interesting web of connections there, that Ultimate Prowler is Aaron Davis, 616 Prowler is Hobie Brown, a different version of Hobie Brown is Spider-Punk. It's all connected.
It's all connected. And they included that shot from Community in Into the Spider-Verse too.
Yep.
This film was completed just 13 days before the release of the film in theaters. The runtime is 140 minutes, which now sets the record for the longest animated film produced by an American studio.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. The film did receive some backlash when it was revealed in Vulture in June of 2023 of the poor working conditions for the animators.
Ironic that Vulture is taking down Spider-Man.
Yeah. There were 4 animators that revealed that Lord would have the animators change portions of the film's completed scenes multiple times, and that his decisions would take precedent over the director's decisions. The animators were forced to work more hours and days in a week to make sure that the film was completed in time. The team would ask for approved animation layouts, but many other requests went unheard. Because of these conditions, over 100 artists left the production before its completion. Sony has denied any allegations, and Amy Pascal has defended Phil Lord, stating that heavy revisions in filmmaking is normal. Hopefully, the labor strikes will wake studios up and help improve the working conditions of their employees.
Changes are normal, but it really sounds like, based off of reports the animators were saying, there were steps that they could have done to avoid this many changes.
Yes.
They could have spent more time in previs. They could have spent more time in the preparation so we wouldn't have to do all of these last minute changes.
Yeah.
It sounds like Lord and Miller were like, well, we want to see the finished versions before we make changes, so just finish it instead.
Yeah.
Which is really unfortunate and not the way, the conditions that somebody should be working in. Otherwise, you've got a thief in the cobbler situation going on, you know?
Yes.
It almost sounds like the last minute rewrite they did for Into the Spider-Verse. I don't know if that put a bug in their brain where they're like, oh, we can do last minute changes.
Yeah, we can do anything we want to now.
So let's just decide to do everything last minute now, as opposed to taking more time to plan and prep.
Yeah. I mean, we're seeing this now with visual effects artists who are starting to unionize with each other.
Yeah.
And just the overworking of visual effects and kind of the laziness that it comes to filmmaking, where if they can just assume that visual effects are going to fix everything, you take away so much innovation that was prior to in filmmaking, where they were trying to figure out things on set ahead of time, instead of just lazily going into a project and being like, okay, we're just going to film in front of a green screen and it's just going to be filled in later.
Yeah.
We need more creative solutions, and visual effects is not a creative solution.
Yeah.
So back to the MCU. In August 2019, development had begun for a third MCU Spider-Man film. The plan was to make 2 more films featuring Spidey, although Tom Holland was only contracted to do 3 films as Peter Parker, although Holland has stated in interviews that he would portray Spider-Man again if they asked him to. John Watts would stay on as director and agreed to do a 4th Spider-Man film. If you remember the deal Kevin Feige made with Amy Pascal after he got hit with a sandwich, Marvel agreed to 5% of the revenue while taking on the production costs, which is an awful deal. So Marvel wanted to renegotiate the deal. Marvel was now asking anywhere from 25 to 50% of the revenue instead, and Sony refused the deal. In September of 2019, Sony chairman Tony Vinciquerra announced that the MCU Spider-Man would be removed from the MCU and will join Sony's Spider-Man universe from there on, stating that, for the moment, the door is closed. The fans were not happy, and they were very vocal at that year's D23 convention. It got to the point where Tom Holland actually had to speak personally with Disney CEO Bob Iger and Sony Pictures Motion Picture Chairman Tom Rothman to reconsider the deal. The companies finally returned and renegotiated. The new deal that everyone agreed with was that Disney would co-finance 25% of the production and receive 25% of the profits, and the MCU was allowed to use Spider-Man as a guest character for any future MCU productions. In December of 2019, Chris McKenna and Eric Summers, the two writers behind Far From Home, began developing a script. At first, Kraven the Hunter was considered for the main villain, but John Watts wanted to explore the idea of Peter having to deal with his new public identity. He wanted to tell a story similar to It's a Wonderful Life, where Peter wishes that the world would forget Peter Parker. With that, they knew that they needed the help of Dr. Stephen Strange. The idea then sparked the introduction of the multiverse, and possibly revisiting characters from past Spider-Man films. At first, past Spider-Man versions were going to act as cameos, but the story ideas started to incorporate them more and more into the plot. McKenna and Summers continued to add past characters into the script without knowing if the actors were available. The duo continued to create the story and transition Green Goblin from Sam Raimi's film from a cameo into the film's main villain. At one point, America Chavez was in the film as the Sorcerer's Apprentice type role, but that ability was then pushed to Ned's character instead. America Chavez was then reserved for Doctor Strange in Multiverse of Madness. Multiverse of Madness was originally going to be released before No Way Home, as an explanation as to how Doctor Strange had any knowledge of the multiverse. And filming was expected to begin in mid-2020, but due to the COVID pandemic, production stalled, and now it looked like No Way Home was going to be released in November of 2021, and Multiverse of Madness wouldn't be released until the year after that. So all of Doctor Strange's scenes had to be rewritten without him having knowledge of the multiverse. After the release of Spider-Man No Way Home and all the nostalgia surrounding that film, fans took to Twitter and got the hashtag Make Sam Raimi Spider-Man 4 trending. With Sam Raimi coming back to direct another Marvel film, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, fans were hopeful that Sony would listen to their demands and make a fourth Tobey Maguire, Sam Raimi Spider-Man film. They were even pushing for Andrew Garfield to come back for another film. Amy Pascal was hoping to make a new Spider-Man trilogy using Tom Holland as their lead, and in December of 2021, Kevin Feige told the New York Times that he, Amy, Sony, and Marvel were in talks to develop a new Spider-Man film. And then in April of 2022, John Watts left the production for Marvel Studios' Fantastic Four, stating that he needed a break from big blockbuster films. And according to Deadline Hollywood, Sony is hoping for Tom Holland, Zendaya, and Watts to return for a new Spider-Man film. Now, in February of 2023, Kevin Feige told Entertainment Weekly that a script is currently in development. In May of 2023, Amy Pascal was interviewed by Variety about future Spider-Man films, especially in the midst of a writer's strike. She announced that there was going to be a Spider-Woman movie, a live-action Miles Morales film, and a fourth Tom Holland Spider-Man film, that they were all in development. But with the writer's strike and the actor strike currently going on, we know that all productions are on pause right now.
Mm-hmm.
But that is it.
All right. Wow. That's a lot of Spider-Man.
So much Spider-Man. Whew.
I hope Beyond the Spider-Verse is good.
Mm-hmm.
And Spider-Man is a fun character and comics are fun.
Yes.
And superhero movies are fun.
Now, before we go, there's a few announcements that we do need to make. Because of my job situation, I am going to cut this season short, and this is going to be the final episode of season 5. This will allow me to actually regather and actually start off season 6 and have that continue properly, where we have the episodes coming out weekly instead of coming out monthly like we were having recently. But also, we put out the announcement.
Yeah, I can go ahead and say that I'm going to be taking a little break from podcasting in general for the time being. This is actually going to be my last podcast I record for the near future. You know, I've been feeling the burnout and needing a break. Everybody's been very understanding, and I absolutely love doing this. I had such a blast talking about Spider-Man for 4 hours today. I got to also take a break sometimes. Mm-hmm. When this podcast returns for the next season, I might not be a co-host on it, but I've had such a blast doing it until now, and I'm looking forward to recuperating a little bit.
And obviously, when you are ready to come back from what we're calling your sabbatical.
My sabbatical. That's exactly what it is.
Obviously, when you are ready, I know that the Pipedream family is more than welcome to have you back and continuing on in our podcast journey. But we understand having burnout. We understand taking a break. So don't feel bad about that.
I appreciate it. I really do. I guess I can give the typical end of the podcast things. So thanks again, everybody, for listening. If you want to find more episodes of this show, you can go to our website, pipedreampodcasts.com, which is also the home of other shows such as Come On Fahugwa Pods, Escape from Vault Disney, and Pod Made You Special. While you're there, you can also find links to our social media pages. We are on Twitter at HDTNGM. We're on Instagram at How Did This Not Get Made. There's always incredible resources there of pictures and things that we find. We mentioned a bunch of comic art in this episode, and I have a feeling that Dan's going to share a lot of that.
It's going to be nothing but comic book art. It's going to be great.
You can also send your emails to notgetmade@gmail.com with suggestions, corrections, other thoughts on the podcast. We really appreciate hearing from you. If you would like to support this podcast, you can go check out our Patreon page that supports this show and our other podcasts, and we really appreciate all the support we get. That's going to go ahead and wrap up this season. Thank you, everybody, so much for listening.
Thank you.
You do too much. You're not Superman, you know.